Welcome to our latest Reimagining Mobility podcast series. I'm here with Jen Durfy today. Jen leads our segment for vehicle, very broad area. So maybe Jen, starting out with if all the people listening in or watching this get a better idea of what does vehicle mean? I mean, we know what a vehicle is, but at AVL.
And more specifically for AVL, right?
There you go.
So obviously we don't create vehicles, we don't make vehicles. So our focus really has been about how do we, help the development process of vehicles. So learning about and measuring vehicle attributes, whether it's from NVH to drivability. We have a lot of tools. AVL likes their tools, so we tend to use those tools to help that process. It then extends into simulation. It also extends into demonstrator builds, any way that we can kind of help the vehicle process more than creating just a vehicle.
Mm-hmm. I know you're very passionate about benchmarking, and that's what you just mentioned, attributes, right?
Yep.
Obviously falls into that. And you mentioned tools. Yes, we are very proud of our tools. We have lots of them, as we know. How has that changed over the last 5 years? Are you still using the exact same tool you used 5 years ago, or using the same tools, but they have continuously been upgraded? Or if you look back 5 years, you use 2 different tools. Today you use 10 different tools. Give us an idea of how tools and simulation plays into what your segment, the vehicle segment, is doing.
For benchmarking specifically, I think captures both things. So the tools have had to evolve, to keep up with the new and emerging technologies, right? So we had AVL Drive, which was originally for drivability, now encompasses things like ADAS. It also encompasses handling or ride comfort. So what was originally just a tool for one purpose has had to expand to meet other sorts of attributes. Mm-hmm. Then there's other things like vehicle thermal, where we have to use different tools, some AVL, some not AVL, in order to do the measurements and the data acquisition to do the analysis. Mm-hmm. So I guess both, the new things, create new opportunities, but we also have to, expand our tools to meet the new requirements from the technology point of view.
On the topic of AVL Drive, I know where I came from, this was always something that we looked at and says, wow, this is a cool tool. Wish we had one of those. Mm-hmm. Now I own it, so to speak, or you own it.
Yeah.
I'm involved to some degree. How long has that been around? And give me an idea of how popular it is outside of AVL to do, again, objective measures, ADAS testing, data collection, whatever it is. Give me an idea here.
So the tool's been around for about 20 years, maybe 20 plus years if one of my colleagues is listening and wants to be specific. The other products have been around a much shorter time, but definitely the foothold has been in drivability assessment. We like to say, because we have had customers publicly announce that they use AVL Drive in their development process, that it really is an industry standard, at least for drivability. Mm-hmm. We'd like to be able to say the same thing, for handling in ADAS one day, but
sure.
Yeah.
So when, let's say, J.D. Power and Associates comes out with a quality rating or just in general a vehicle rating, a recommendation or whatever the type of assessment they're coming out with, is there a chance that with your tool you could have said, yeah, I could have told you so?
Well, this is one of the areas where we've had to come up with new ways of looking at, the same data. We've had some feedback that we really want the tool to be able to predict what J.D. Power is going to say. So, we can't focus on every issue in terms of drivability, but we'd really like to narrow in on the things that customers are complaining about. And so we have done some studies and developed some new features within the tool that enable that type of analysis to be done.
Okay. When we talk about prototype vehicles, that we're also obviously heavily working on new technology demonstrator vehicles, prototype vehicles, proof of concepts. How important is it for those types of projects to have the capability in-house and tie that together with benchmarking? Is there a need to bring this in, or do customers kind of bring their own technology and, hey, just put this together because we're not understanding the complete and complex vehicle system, that's why we need you as an expert to do it? Or is benchmarking sometimes playing a role there as well, where we can advise on what truly is cutting edge versus what a customer may think or not think is cutting edge?
So there's that part of it, but I think also gives the team, I guess, the cutting edge perspective on what technology is out there and how it performs, right? So when a customer does come to us with a technology demonstrator, we have the familiarity with what DC-DC or inverters and types of motors that work well together or could be applied to, I guess, supplement their technology, right? Mm-hmm. So there's knowing what's out there on the market at a first glance, right? Knowing what is, state of the art right now helps with, what's to come in the future.
Okay. Maybe a slightly different topic. When it comes to young people looking for a job in the mobility space, everybody talks about software, the software-defined vehicle, software this, software that. Maybe to one degree, rightfully so, a super exciting area. On the other side, I'm pretty sure you have your own viewpoint on why should they go into vehicle, why should they come to your segment?
Well, and more specifically, testing, being a test engineer in the vehicle space, it's fun, right? I mean, you get to actually drive vehicles. And since it's something you actually buy with your own money, you have a personal invested interest in, I guess, the quality and how vehicles are advancing because it affects you personally, mm-hmm. right? And then I guess from a, interest point of view, there's just so much to learn. There is just a wealth of information and knowledge to be gained on all sorts of different systems. So since my background's testing, I believe it when I see it and I feel it and can touch it. And it's never a dull moment, that's for sure.
So some people in the past have told me, yeah, testing is fun. You'll learn a lot. You get your hands into a lot of things. You get to understand how it is and is not supposed to operate. But you really it doesn't help you ultimately become a design engineer, ultimately better understand why or why not. Would you agree with that?
I don't know how it couldn't help you. I think having hands-on, maybe some people are more, book smart, right? They can just read it in a book and apply it. That hasn't been my experience. It's definitely seeing it in the real world. Some things even, the data is the data. So even though it wasn't supposed to look like that, it did come out that way. So there's learnings that I guess you can't get just from a book. And there's a complex interaction of systems that when the data speaks, you need to listen.
When it comes to testing, you mentioned testing is certainly a very critical area for the entire industry, and AVL is big into it with tools, methodologies, smart engineers. What is the one thing that you think is a difference between, let's say, the startups, and I would include a Tesla still as a startup, and a traditional OEM in the US or globally, doesn't matter. What do you see as a difference of how they approach, maybe the same, but I believe differently, I would like to hear from you, differently the testing part of a vehicle development program?
And this is just my own opinion, I can't really back it up since I haven't worked for a startup, but it appears as though they approach the design process from a clean sheet, starting point. So the way they go about doing things is not based on how things have been done in the past. So the way they would test them would be completely different. So I think they have the opportunity to learn from what's done in the past, but then also apply some new ways to kind of increase efficiency and reduce certain redundancies in their products. That's my thought, because some of the solutions have been quite clever, and whether it reduces their testing or they choose to reduce the testing, it's not clear to me.
Would you also then say they're more open-minded to suggestions and methodologies that we may bring to the table versus, interesting, thank you very much, but we've been doing this for 20 years?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Although they seem to have that built into their own, I guess, company culture, so they don't tend to use, I guess, engineering service providers so much for that part of the process. Okay. Right now.
Yeah. When you do benchmarking, let's say, I mean, I've driven some of your vehicles, right? The Tesla Plaid would be one of them, the Lucid Air, both really fun cars to drive. I drove the Polestar. I've driven many other ones that you have. Is one of the fun parts of the job I think both
Right.
of you probably have or can participate in. But the statements you just made with simulation that we more use, with the tool, the AVL Drive tool that some may use, some may not use to develop cars, and you know who they are. And with a mindset of, again, different type of testing or methodologies that are not based on necessarily, well, we've always done it that way, but maybe on different ideologies or whatever it might be. Can you personally, when you benchmark these things, can you say, see, this is another example of where we see why this method turns into a different product compared with somebody else that may or may not have a history?
100%.
Can you see some of these things?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Sometimes the way, that, especially with, I think, vehicle thermal, there's interesting parts within, like the Tesla Model Y, where they'll run the motors in order to generate the heat. So that's kind of, counterintuitive, where you're like, well, that should be an efficiency loss, but if they're gaining efficiency by keeping the interior warm, it's a whole system balance. So it's the strategies that are applied are definitely something that are gleaned out, and people challenge the way they're thinking now.
Do you see when we do some of those benchmarking reports, I mean, we generate the reports and then we sell the reports, and maybe we advise or add support to interpreting a report and adding some of our, let's say, professional opinions and determinations to it. Do you see a lot of the people that buy these reports actually really considering what, let's say, what you just mentioned with the thermal management that the Tesla does in this particular case, that they really take this in? Or is it more like, yeah, that was interesting to see, but no, we know better? Do you have an idea of how many people really take it in and say, you know what, I got to challenge my organization to really give this approach a hard look versus, interesting, guys, look at it, but we'll continue our way? Do you have an idea of how, at the end of the day, how beneficial you feel these reports are for the people that take it, not just buy the report, but really also then implement it?
Right. I think that's the fun part, is in some of the presentations, presenting some of the data and having somebody say, oh, I had no idea that they did that. How they choose to apply that within their organization, maybe we don't have as much visibility on, but it's always fun to kind of generate that surprise or, oh, I did not know that. So we all have opportunity to learn, right?
Sure. And you feel like it makes it then back to the next vehicle program that somebody is developing? You feel like there is a strong correlation? Yeah.
To maybe there's a different way of doing things.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there is definitely correlation between benchmarking reports and a program or a vehicle that comes out 2 or so years later then.
And I guess, our program has, our benchmarking program has become more and more in-depth. So I guess the Model Y would be the first one where we've gone so far down into the strategies and how they're applied. So considering that's just completed, just recently, then it would be a few years yet before we see if somebody else would take an octo-valve type approach to their vehicle thermal. But
all right, Jen, let's talk about a little bit about thermal management. I had Adam Dendrinos here a while back, and we talked about batteries, and it was clear that many people that we help develop batteries or do batteries for, traction batteries, they oftentimes maybe don't think as much about the thermal management of a battery as we think they should, and how critical it is, right, from a safety perspective, but also clearly also from a performance perspective. And I think something similar is true for a complete vehicle, a thermal management. But tell us a little bit, what are some of the things that people may not think about when they hear thermal management? Because in my opinion, a lot of people talk about it, but it always comes out, yeah, it's not a big deal, we'll do it. But as of recent, especially with electric vehicle, where range and efficiency has become even more a hot topic than it ever was before, what is it that you see in that area?
Well, there was a big transition from ICE vehicles to battery electric vehicles because you don't have that heat source anymore, right?
Yeah.
Engines are great, they produce lots of heat, but you have to be able to create that heat in a battery electric vehicle. Managing that heat across, passenger comfort, component safety, whether it's the e-motors, the inverters, the battery itself, finding the balance to make sure that all those systems are operating, I guess, nicely together is a huge challenge. So it's thermodynamics at its highest, understanding how things are applied, and ultimately to get the best efficiency you can from the system, right? Because everything is about efficiency and getting the longest, I guess, range that you can from the battery.
So it's really from a component to a subsystem to a complete system. It's way more involved than maybe from the outside looking in one could think it would be.
Absolutely.
Okay. Last question for you. If you look forward, let's say 5 years, with all your knowledge and experience on thermal management, vehicle benchmarking, vehicles in general, what do you see a vehicle to look like in 5 years? What are some of the 2 or 3 things that you could see with our benchmarking that we've done or that you have done that we helped OEMs improve? Just give me an idea of how you think a vehicle will look like in 5 years. So what are some of the differences from a vehicle today to one in 5 years or maybe 10 years?
Yeah, so I do think the stronghold on electrification will continue to push vehicles in that realm. I do also think autonomy is something that will also, as we see these vehicles come out with more and more features, it's just a matter of time before all those features are stitched together. Whether or not customers want something like that or not, it's still fun to see how the technology is progressing. So I think that's those 2 areas I think will continue to grow. How they will morph into what the customer actually wants will be, I think, the interesting part.
So maybe then the last one, not my last question, I guess, but the second to last, or not the last. 3 years ago, everybody talked about range, EV range. Today, I feel like that's really not the main question, and we see it now more and more. It's really, and you and I were at a conference about a year ago where this was really brought up about charging speed. What is your opinion about it? Is it really still about range, or is it really, I don't care, my vehicle can go 200 miles and save a lot of weight and a lot of cost because my battery is smaller, but I can now charge instead of 2 hours, I can charge in 15 minutes, in 5 minutes.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah. What do you think is really, in 5 or 10 years, what do people want? The big battery with the big range, or a more economical solution? And yes, maybe I have to charge a little more often, but I charge it in 5 minutes.
I think it'll be about convenience, right? I think it'll be, if it becomes more convenient than having to go get gas in your vehicle, I think you'll see that more adoption, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. Jen, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Thanks for listening to Reimagine Mobility Podcast. If you like this episode, please subscribe and tell a friend.